Welcome to Drummonds Dub in Herefordshire. Drummonds is a venue that's particularly close to my heart because it's where I spent a lot of time in my youth fishing matches and really learning about these big natural lakes. It's a venue that holds a big head of skimmers and bream, there's an odd tench and plenty of roach. And it's a great place to come early spring because you can use various methods to try and target the lake's head of silverfish. Today we're going to look at fishing long pole for skimmers using fish meal baits. We may catch a tench if we're lucky, and then the short pole we're going to ball in ground bait, a nice sweet mix, and try and catch roach on casters both on the deck and through the water. It's a brilliant venue. Join us, it'll hopefully be a good day. Right, let's have a look at the bait that we're going to use here at Drummonds Dub. Drummonds is fundamentally a natural lake, but it does see a lot of carp anglers. The carp anglers use fish meal baits, boilies, pellets and fish meal additives. So the tench and bream that live in this lake have now got a taste for fish meal. It used to be that we catch them on natural baits, worms and casters in ground bait. Those days have now gone and we have to rely on fish meal to catch them. So the long pole line is going to be fed with a fish meal ground bait, a nice darkish brown colour. The water's not gin clear. We've had quite a bit of overnight rain over the last week, so it's washed a little bit of colour into the lake. So it's going to be a nice dark brown colour laid on the bottom. In the ground bait we're going to introduce some 4mm pellets and some corn. Now they may sound like quite big baits, but this lake holds a lot of roach. And what I don't want to happen is to put a carpet of smaller baits, dead maggots and micro pellets, say, in the ground bait, and for the roach to get to the bait before the bream and basically clear the peg out before any larger fish have come in and had time to settle over it before we can actually go long and plunder them. The short line, the roach line, is going to be fed with a natural ground bait, lake and roach, mixed quite wet and balled in. The balls will be squeezed quite loosely so that they actually go in and almost break up as they go down, and if they hit the deck they'll then disperse, releasing the casters and hemp that are inside the ground bait. The reason for balling, as you can see, it's an enormous lake and there's lots of roach, but those roach could be anywhere. So what I want to do is create noise and actually draw those fish into the peg as quickly as I can. The short line's where I'm going to look to start, and you want that initial response that the balling brings in the fish. They may be small to start with, but I'd hope by loose feeding over the top that we can gradually wean the fish off the ground bait and look to catch bigger fish over purely loose feed casters as the day goes on. Casters generally are the best bait for catching big roach on natural lakes like this. Let's see how we get on. Let's have a look at the rigs that we're using today, starting with the long line. So we've got about 6.5, possibly 7 foot of water on the long pole line. Starting at the hook, it's a sphere match in a 16. It's a nice lightish gauge hook, but with enough strength that if we do hook a tench, there's every chance of getting it in without it straightening the hook. The hook length is 0.12. Again, it's light enough that we're going to get some bites. We're not in summer yet, it's still early spring, so we can't get away with fishing really heavy hook lengths. Main line's 0.14. Above the hook length there we've got 2 number 9 droppers. They're big positive droppers. As I've said, there's a lot of roach in this lake, and if we do start getting lifts and hold-ups when we're lowering the bait down, we need to see that registered on the float. Similarly, when the bream are in the peg, it's important if a bream picks the bait up that you see a good positive result on the float. It may be as the day goes on that I actually push this second dropper above the first one to create a double bulk if we're fishing for lifts. It's particularly good if you're using baits like expanders on this lake. Moving from the second shot up, it's probably about 6 inches or 7 inches of line there. We've then got a small tapered bulk with 10s, 9s and 8s. And then moving up to the float, it's wire stem, rugby ball shape and with a hollow bristle. Hollow bristle is important on the long pole line here. The light conditions are quite poor, and with a hollow bristle the sun actually shines through it and you get really nice visibility when you're looking for bites on the long pole. And then an important point actually is the length of line between the float and the connector. There's probably 1.5 feet of line. We're fishing 14.5 metres here. It's a big lake and it is open to the elements. Although it looks fairly calm behind me, it can get gusty, and you need to make sure that the rig is stable on that long pole at all times. The float size itself is actually a 0.8, which is about right for the depth of water and the conditions that we're faced with today. The elastic is a Browning microbore. It's the green hollow, which is lovely and forgiving for skimmers, but equally there's enough power through it that if we do hook a big fish, if it's a small carp or a tench, it's got the power there to get it in. So moving to the short pole line, we'll start with the rig for fishing firmly on the deck. It's the same hook pattern. It's a sphere match, this time in an 18 and a 0.10 bottom. We don't need to fish any lighter than 0.10. It really won't make a difference to the amount of fish we catch on the short pole here. Moving up from the hook length, they're number 10 droppers, so quite positive. We'll be able to read the indications of fish if they do move these droppers in the lower part of the rig. And again then 7 inches above the top dropper, a small tapered bulk. 013 mainline. The float is a 0.4. It's carbon stem. We don't need the stability on the short pole line that we do on the long pole line. Nice tapered rugby ball, and it's a fibre bristle. Fibre bristles are great when you're fishing for roach because they just give you that little bit more sensitivity when you're fishing baits like casters and maggots. You see everything through a fibre bristle. Again, probably a foot of line on this rig on the shorter pole, and this is then going up to a natural latex 5. The second rig for the short pole line is for catching on the deck, but through the water. Now I expect this rig to come into play later in the day when the fish have got a taste for the casters falling through the water, and you'll catch possibly some of the best stamped fish on this rig. It's a sphere match again, size 18, identical hook length and mainline to the deck rig that I showed you earlier, but this time it's strung 11s in an Italian style, so starting probably 4.5 to 5 inches apart here, gradually as you move up the rig, the shots become tighter together, coming up to probably 3 inches, 2.5 inches at the top of the rig there. And the float is a sort of classic carrot-shaped float in a 4x12s, again a foot of line and a number 5 latex there. It's really important when you're fishing through the water to have a carbon stem, because the carbon stem, unlike a wire stem, will actually follow the shot through the water and you'll be able to read the bristle. If a fish intercepts the bait before the rig's actually fully settled, you'll see the bite. With a wire stem, the float actually cocks before the bait has fallen through the water, and you'll miss any indication of fish intercepting the bait as it's falling. So a carbon stem is an absolute must when you're looking to fish through the water for roach. It's a fairly typical sort of stamped fish to start the session with then. The fish will get bigger. When you first ball in on these big open expanses of water, the first fish to show are usually the smallest stamped fish. But I think by actually drawing them into the peg, it helps to create the activity that then over time brings in the bigger fish. If you'd have cut bait in, it's very difficult to actually create a competition amongst the fish that are in the peg, because you've not made any noise to draw additional fish from the surrounding area. There's a slightly better fish. It's a good start. Probably 3 ounces. Again, just a single caster, size 18. No need to bury the hook, just nick the top of the caster like you would a maggot. The more hook you can show, generally the better when you're fishing for roach, because you just get that little bit more hook in the fish's mouth when you take the bait. And actually when you've got fish in your peg and they're competing, I don't think actually having hook showing makes any real difference. I think they're watching the bait fall as you're loose feeding over the top. Another fish there. Looks like another quite decent stamped fish for early in the session. Yeah, nice roach. Caster wise, I like to try and find a sort of darkish brown caster. When they go black or a really dark brown, they're not quite so good. It's that real sort of dark crisp brown colour that you're looking for. It just seems to be the one to pick out the roach. It seems to be their favourite. So you just lower the rig in, lower the last sort of couple of inches of the float slightly slower, pick the catapult up, decent pouch of casters in the area. Just missed a bite then, lower the rig again, just hold the float, pretty much a full float's length, and then lower it down. Any fish then that are feeding in that bottom part of the water on the casters that you're loose feeding will have a chance to see your bait and follow it down. Another roach. All the time that we're at the start of the session building the peg with these loose feed casters, catching fish on the deck, my mind is thinking to the sort of later stages when hopefully we'll be able to bring these fish off the bottom and catch on that strung rig that I showed you at the beginning of this video. If you can catch the fish off the bottom, they're quite often a bigger stamp and you can catch them faster because they're competing in amongst these loose feed casters. At the moment they're over the top of the ground bait and eating the bait that's actually laid on the deck. Another nice roach. .4 ounce. This is really good early spring fishing. It's nice when you come out of winter, the sun's out, it's probably 10 or 11 degrees today, and you're just getting bites again on the short pole after what seems like a really long winter. You will get an odd missed bite when you're loose feeding bait over the top of ground bait, because there will be, even early in the session, fish coming off the deck and intercepting bait, so you will get some missed bites, but that's fine, it's part of it, because you're just building the peg all the time, looking to those later stages when you can really start to build a weight of fish off the deck. Lower the rig nice and slowly, the full float's length out the water, really slowly just lower it down to the fish. More often than not you'll get a bite just as the bait touches the bottom, or within a few seconds of the rig actually settling down to a pimple. If you don't get a bite, it's a case of repeating the process, or some days you may find actually that just leaving the rig in and hanging on to the float against the toe, you might catch a slightly better stamp fish. We've had a good run of roach fishing on the deck with the bolt rig and a little look for bream, but at the moment it seems to be that there's just roach settled over the bream line. So we've fed it again and just come on this sort of strung Italian rig over the top of the roach line, and it's been really, really good. Nice stamp fish every chuck. Not changed the way we're feeding, exactly the same as the start. Single caster, ship the rig out and then just turn the rig over so that all the shot straightens out. Got more chance of catching a swan at the moment than a roach, I think. Just turn the rig over like that and all the shots just settling now through those casters. And there's a roach. It's definitely a bigger average stamp of fish on the strung rig. I think as the fish come into the peg and they start to compete, once that initial ground bait's been largely eaten and they're just reliant then on the loose feed, you end up with a bigger stamp of fish in the peg, really giving them quite a big pouch of casters as well. There's sort of 15 to 20 casters at a minimum over the top of that line. It's just settling now, sort of last third of the peg, and another fish. Nice stamp. Beautiful condition in here. The roach have always looked pristine. I don't think they really get fished for very often. Certainly now the carp anglers have sort of such a stronghold on the lake, and it doesn't see a great deal of match fishing. It's largely neglected, and the roach are just pristine. Just turn that rig over again. We're still fishing on the deck. The rig is at full depth, but we're catching the fish in the sort of bottom third. As it warms up and you get further into spring, you'll actually catch the fish much shallower. But today it's the sort of bottom third that they're sitting in. There's another fish. Just lovely fishing. Good stamp roach. All the while I'm just keeping an eye on that long bream line. If I see any signs of bubbling, it's a very silty lake, and when the bream come into your peg, they'll often give themselves away by blowing little pinprick bubbles on the surface as they move the silt. So I'm just keeping an eye to see if there is any sign of that while I'm fishing this short line. As soon as I see any opportunity to go long and catch the bream, I will, but there's no point fishing at 14.5 metres shipping a roach, and you can catch them at 6 metres as we are now. It's important when you're fishing these caster rigs to use the lightest float you can. There's a little bit of a wind today, and it's blowing from left to right. It's changing as the day goes on. If you had a 4x10s float, the presentation wouldn't be quite right, because the wind would actually catch hold of the rig and you'd miss bites because you've not got brilliant bait presentation. The 4x12s, although there's only a tiny amount of difference in the weight, it just gives you that little bit more positivity as the rig's settling. Some days you could even use a 4x14s if it is really windy, just to get that presentation perfect as the bait's falling through the water. The rig's just getting down to the last third now. And watch the shot just cock against the float. A little hold up there, I think. Another roach. Catch one more and I think it might be time for bream. Just pick out a nice dark caster. Again, hook it like a maggot, plenty of hook showing. The fish there now, they're feeding so well that you can afford to have so much hook point showing, because they're not inspecting the bait, they're intercepting the bait as it falls. You're not fishing for cute fish that are watching the bait and rejecting it. You're fishing for active fish. Just missed a bite then. Little indication. There we are, another roach. Right, it's time to have a look on the bream line, I think. Just gone out onto the bream line, having refed it for the second time, and we've hooked our first one. The roach today have been a real problem. Seem to have woken up and they went straight over the top of the line that we'd fed for bream. It's like a big fish actually, it's just wallowing on the surface. Great big cold bream. Yeah, the roach went straight over the top of the fish meal bait that we fed for the bream, which I didn't expect. And the top-ups have actually had to be neat pellet and corn, no ground bait, in order to get these bream to settle. I say it's the second top up without any ground bait, and we've just caught the first one. Lovely fish. Probably 2.5 pound of Drummonds dub bream. Glorious fish. Let's go and see if there's another one. And it's taken probably 2 minutes to hook another one. Just goes to show that if you think your feeding is right at the start and you don't catch what you expect to, that you can change. And the volume of bait that we're actually putting in now seems ridiculous for the time of year. It's only very early spring and it's the end of February, and we're giving these fish almost a full pot of pellets and corn purely to overfeed the roach, or feed the roach off, and actually make sure that there's some bait on the bottom for these skimmers to come and settle over. Smaller fish that time, but a skimmer nonetheless. Pick out a nice sized piece of corn. See if there's another one waiting. Ship the rig out, line up with the claw bank marker. Check that the rig's straight, there's no tangles, and lower the rig in. Because of the volume of roach, we're not looking to lower the rig slowly. We don't want to draw attention to the bait, which is very different to when we're fishing the short line and you're trying to actually catch the attention of the fish. On this long line, you just want to drop the rig straight down, make sure that it's straight, and get that bait to the bottom. Corn's about an inch over depth, and it's just sat there nicely in amongst the bait that we've fed. I'm not looking to move the rig, I'm just going to leave it dead still for a couple of minutes. If I don't get a bite, I'll lift the rig out, drop it again. I'm not looking to lift and drop, because if there are roach, it'll just draw them into that corn, and you've got more chance then of either getting missed bites or fish that you just don't want to catch. While we're fishing this long line, we'll continue to feed the casters on that short line, because it may be at any point that we've got to refeed the long line and come short again. We'll just keep those casters going in there. The beauty of this sphere pole is, whilst I'm out here fishing for these skimmers and loose feeding this short line, the ergonomic pole protector, the sort of square butt that I have here, is just lovely, trapped under your arm. You can fish long, 14.5 metres, and just loose feed these casters without any trouble at all. Missed bite then, just come back in and check the corn. Just want to make sure that the hook is showing nicely and that there's every chance if you get a bite that it pricks the fish's mouth. Just adjust that slightly. Again, you ship the rig out and drop the bait directly over the top of the feed. I won't give it very long before I feed again out there. If I start to get signs of missed bites or roach, I'll know that the bream have moved on and that the roach are back in the peg. Probably only give it a maximum of 5 minutes, no longer than this chuck. If I don't catch another one, I'll come back in and I'll give them another half a pot of pellets and corn and let them settle back down over the top of the feed. It seems to be that if there's not a volume of bait there, that the roach just come back into the peg and you've then got no chance of catching bream. There's a roach, so it's time to refeed. whilst these roach are great fish, it's not what you're looking to catch on the long pole. So put that rig down, pick the cupping kit up. Really good handful of 4mm pellets. Decent amount of corn. And pop this back in over the top. I'm not looking to create any noise when I put this bait in. Very different to the roach fishing where you're looking to actually create noise with the casters and the balling in. I'm looking literally here to sneak it in. Actually put the tip of the pole under the water, turn it over, releasing those pellets and corn. Little tap, that's all the bait out. No noise at all. There we go. Another bream on the long pole. Feels like quite a good fish. It's really important at this time of year when you're not catching huge weights of fish, just to take your time with the fish. Some of these bream are 2.5 and 3 pound. You really don't have to catch that many of them in a match. So just take your time, make sure you get them in. Keep the top get nice and low and just bring them to the side. In the net. Well, that's a lovely way to end our session here at Drummonds Dub. A nice pound skimmer on what's been a really lovely day's fishing and a bit of a trip down memory lane for me. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope to catch you on the bank soon.